I wish we could put up butcher paper all over this space and just write and draw and dream together about this fabulous dream society that Isaiah wants us to create. But we can't do that. So I want to focus on one single aspect of this society that speaks to me. It's the value of proximity. I think in Isaiah's imagination, the Jewish people returning home now understand what the purpose of religion truly is. It's to help them show up as more compassionate human beings out in the world and sensitize them more deeply to the world's pain. They now, we hope, have an instinctive kind of response to poverty. They share the bread with the hungry, they take the poor into their homes, clothe the naked, and don't turn away when they see a homeless person or someone who's clearly struggling on the street. And in this renewed society, those who dwell on high don't just hang out in their places of wealth and privilege. They, like God in verse 15, actually go down and spend time with the poor, the lowly, and the depressed. This is a society where people aren't afraid to get proximate to those in pain and those who are suffering. This past June, Bryan Stevenson, a lawyer fighting against the death penalty and wrongful incarceration cases, spoke to a room of business leaders about what he called the power of proximity. He tells a story about one of his first cases as a lawyer working with children who had been prosecuted as adults. He met a 14-year-old boy who lived in a home with his mother, and she had a boyfriend who had come home drunk and violent. One night, this boyfriend came home, told his mother to go into the kitchen, and punched her in the face. She fell on the floor, bleeding and unconscious, and her son came running into the room to help her. He tried to revive her and stop the bleeding, but after 10 minutes, she was still unconscious, and this little boy thought that his mother was dead. So meanwhile, the boyfriend stumbled to the bedroom and laid down on the bed and fell asleep. The boy went into the bedroom to pick up the phone and call the police or call an ambulance, but then remembered that this man stored a handgun in the night table. He went and pulled out the gun, walked over to where his mother's boyfriend was sleeping, and pointed the gun at the man who was snoring. But when the man stopped snoring, the boy jumped, and his hand hit the trigger. And when he pulled the trigger, he shot the man in the head, killing him instantly. It was a horrible, tragic moment. And this boy was small for his age and had never been in trouble before, and so he might have been tried as a juvenile were it not for the fact that his mother's boyfriend happened to be a deputy sheriff. So the prosecutor insisted that he be tried as an adult, and so he was sent to the adult jail. So his lawyer, Bryan Stevenson, got to the jail after the boy had already been there for 3 days, and he noticed how terrified the boy looked. He wouldn't say a word, but he just kept staring up at Bryan, silent. And Bryan said, "Look, I can't help you if you won't talk to me. You have to say something." But he was silent, so Bryan moved his chair closer to the boy, and still he wouldn't say anything. And then Bryan just leaned his entire weight of his body on the boy and put his arm around him and said, "Look, you just got to talk to me, please. I can't help you if you don't say anything." And then all of a sudden, this boy starts to cry. And then the boy started to talk, not about what happened with his mom, not about what happened with the man, but about the last 3 days that he spent in this adult jail, about the men who had hurt him on his first night, the sexual assault he experienced on the second night, and the numbers of men after men who just kept hurting him on the third night. And he just sat there sobbing hysterically for an hour. And finally, Bryan said, "I will help you. We're going to get you out of here." And he started to get up and go, and the boy just grabbed onto his jacket and said, "Please don't go." And so as Bryan Stevenson is telling this story to the room of business leaders, he says to them, "When I left the jail, the question in my mind was, who is responsible for this? The answer is, we are. We've allowed ourselves to become distant from some of the most vulnerable people in our society. In any given day, there are 10,000 children being housed in adult jails, and we've allowed narratives to emerge that separate us from some of these children. And I believe that proximity is the solution because you in that space would react just like I did. You would have the same burden I do. And I know in my gut that he's right, and you probably know it too. It is in proximity to others that we become implicated in responsibility for them. Because once you've been close to somebody like that, once you know their story and lean on them in their pain and held them in your arms, you don't really get to go back to being a distant spectator. And I believe that our motivation to support one another and that righteous passion that we can feel flows directly from how much we let ourselves get close to each other's pain and suffering. For a long time, and sometimes, often, even still, I really thought that the kind of people who were activists and some of the social justice rabbis that I admire so deeply were the kind of people that just got out of bed in the morning already angry and fired up about the world's pain and injustice. And they, this big amorphous they, would read a headline in the New York Times about a new anti-immigration policy and just automatically feel their blood boil and then take it to the streets. And I envied them. I envied people who were able to just feel this righteous rage when something's happening that demands our emotional, visceral response. I envy that feeling because it's powerful, because it can lead us to mobilize and to extend ourselves beyond what we're normally capable of, and because it wakes us out of our normal, everyday, slumbering existence and points us to all of these fires that are constantly raging around us. And I thought that maybe there was something wrong with me that I didn't wake up with that kind of anger in my bones, even when I knew there was plenty to be angry about. But I've learned about myself, and maybe this is true for you too, that my own motivation for activism flows not from the number of headlines that I've read, not from the constant back and forth that I'm following between my politically active and very brilliant friends in Facebook, but directly in proportion to how proximate I've gotten to the actual people who are experiencing oppression among us and in our city. Many of you know that I helped to organize Mishkan's justice team, which you saw many of earlier. And when I first arrived at Mishkan and learned that this would be a part of my rabbinic work, it made me pretty nervous because I was brand new, but also because I didn't think that I had this kind of fire and righteous anger that it would take to mobilize a community toward collective action. And I thought I'd have to sort of pull the wool over the eyes of all of our partners and feign that I had more passion and more righteous anger than I actually did. And maybe I could just keep people fooled long enough to think, so that they would think that I actually knew what I was doing and had a few answers. But Bryan Stevenson flipped my notion totally on its head. He said, "Too often we wait until we have all the answers until we get closer to those who are marginalized. I'm actually persuaded that we have to get closer even if we don't have any answers. The power is in the proximity." So I tried to follow my own advice, the advice that I spoke about a little bit on Rosh Hashanah, and I told myself I just needed to show up without the answers, without guarantees that things will change right away. And so over the past few years, we started trying to create meaningful ways for Mishkan community members to get more proximate to one another around social justice issues and to get proximate to the root causes and manifestations of suffering in our city too. Just yesterday morning, a group of our community members gathered with other faith communities at the ICE headquarters downtown to stand in proximity and prayer with a man named Oscar Robles and his family. Oscar, who has lived in this country undocumented since he was a teenager, is now 43 and is married with 2 daughters who are US citizens. He's been dutifully attending his ICE check-ins with the understanding that he doesn't pose any kind of threat. But over the past 2 years, Oscar has been asked to check in more frequently with ICE, and the fear every time is that they could decide to deport him right there on the spot or soon after. And so during this press conference yesterday morning, a number of big shots in Chicago politics spoke and talked about how Oscar would make a model US citizen, how our system was broken, how they would fight for him and his family. But the most important thing to Oscar himself was that we offered prayers at the end. And so every time, and I've been to a couple of these, every time he goes in for his ICE check-in, he asks faith leaders from around the city to come and offer prayers, and he calls us his angels. So we huddled in close under the looming overhang of immigration and customs enforcement, and we prayed, some to our Heavenly Father, some to Av HaRachamim, to our source of compassion and love and justice. And we placed our hands on Oscar's back to strengthen him. And none of us had answers or any guarantees. But it moved me so much to see our community members right there, right next to Oscar and his family and each other. And I think this proximity force is like a magnet on us. Once you've gotten close, you will be pulled back again and again and again, knowing that it's your presence that's being asked for. So I want to invite all of us to find ways to get a little more proximate this year, whether it's joining other Mishkanites who are going down during Sukkot to Mask's Sukkot soiree on the south side, or showing up at Oscar's next ICE check-in, which is scheduled for March, or starting a justice team chavura in your neighborhood. This getting proximate to each other means that we'll need to let go of having all the answers ourselves and instead open ourselves up to new sources of knowledge beyond our own bubbles and beyond our own social circles. It will, at times, be painful and inconvenient. But I can tell you that proximity is our best hope for healing the alienation in our society and within ourselves. Gomar Chatima Tova, may we all be sealed in the book of intimacy and closeness in this year to come.